marks the first day of the BRICS Business Council's discussion on various work streams. Police Minister Begitele paints yet another grim picture of the state of crime in South Africa. And multi-party charter for South Africa signs coalition agreement. A very good afternoon. If you've just joined us, we're coming to you live from our studios here in Johannesburg. Welcome to the Week in Review. Now, this is the program where we review some of the biggest stories to come out of the week. I'm your host, Mfundo Mabalani. All right, we start here this hour. If Africa does not radically change the way it does business, it will not reap the benefits of being part of groups such as BRICS. Now, these are the sentiments of Dean of Ambassadors to South Africa, that's Andre Nzapeyeka. He was speaking at the Caucus of African Business Leaders ahead of the BRICS summit. He says Africans should unite, organize and build capacity to beneficiate raw materials to bring sustainable and inclusive growth to the continent.
Africa has been called on to reorganize itself, build strong regional economic communities and develop common interests to be able to take advantage of the opportunities presented by the BRICS relations and the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. Delegates said that intra-Africa exports are at only 16% of total exports, constrained by the infrastructure deficit. Trade within the BRICS bloc is also dominated by Africa exporting raw materials to BRICS member countries. Investing in infrastructure on the continent is seen as an essential enabler to promoting diversified and inclusive growth. Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement is viewed as a game changer and a major opportunity to help African countries diversify their exports, accelerate growth and attract foreign direct investment.
We should do business differently. There are certain things that we should just stop doing. We should learn and now go into negotiation, new dialogue with the BRICS on the basis of equals, among equals. Our cooperation with the BRICS should be among equals. And we are happy that so far the BRICS countries are treating us like that. But we should not forget that there are also countries with interest, with their business people in the BRICS. And we should build our own capacity to resist to this. Take minerals, for example.
Government says steps are being put in place to address the trade deficit with the various BRICS countries.
There is, in reality, a trade deficit between ourselves and each independent BRICS countries. And we need to be able to change that, close that gap. We export a lot of raw product, import value-added products, but we do, and we have built over a period of time now, the capacity to export value-added products, finished goods, that we can now process our own raw materials. And that's really what we want to exhibit.
The deficit in Africa's infrastructure networks is also seen as an opportunity for public-private partnerships to address the challenges.
The conversations that we're going to have, that we are having as BRICS partners, is how we can reinitiate a public-private partnership model that will help us unlock inter-country infrastructure projects. I'm very excited about that because you know that our rail tracks in the continent don't talk to each other. So we need to invest in that area. We have at the moment trucks transporting very heavy loads on our roads, and therefore the roads are costlier to maintain.
Mabuza says there are discussions about the continent's interconnectedness, as well as making sure that rail and ports work efficiently to promote trade, to not only export raw materials, but value-added goods as well. Gloria Sefakomosi, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Now, today marks the first day of the BRICS Business Council's discussion on various work streams. This is a platform for discussion and collaborations on energy, infrastructure, aviation and the economy of the BRICS bloc ahead of the upcoming 15th BRICS summit. South Africa will play host to delegates from Brazil, Russia, India and China for the summit in Sandton. That's from the 22nd to the 24th of this month. The event in Gallagher today is a build-up, and that's where we find SABC News economics anchor Francis Hurd. Francis, good afternoon. It seems it's all systems go? Just take us through today's program.
So, great. Essentially, this is a trade fair, as you said, and the idea, of course, is to bring different businesses from the different nations here to platform their wares, their services, in the hope that maybe that'll lead to more cross-BRICS country business. So that is part of what's happening behind me. And as you said, there are various discussions about the BRICS economy, about the economy in general, including aviation behind me, a discussion on energy, the just transition that is so crucial. And a lot of this is about how BRICS countries can work together, and also the African continent. Remember, the theme is connecting Africa, and South Africa essentially a representative for the rest of the continent. So these discussions, these fora are important. The BRICS Business Council is part of this organization with government, and I'm now joined by Godiso Mokonyane, who is chair of the BRICS Reinsurance Committee, which is part of the BRICS Business Council. So reinsurance is a little bit complex, but let's make it simple, because this is in fact a huge economic issue. Thank you for being with us. Firstly, explain what reinsurance is. And I think a great example is SASRIA, which protects South Africans from political unrest. Then July 2021 came, and SASRIA has been saying it's hard to get reinsurance because people are seeing South Africa as a risk. Just explain how the links work.
Yeah. So insurance, I think most people understand insurance. It covers you should something bad happen, like, I don't know, if someone passes away or your car gets, in an accident, you can then fix it, right? So insurance companies act in a similar way. They also need help. They want to get assurance that should they have to pay for claims, like, recently COVID-19 claims, should they pay for those claims, they know they have a big brother or big sister who can help share those claims with them. And
share the risk, basically.
Yeah.
Spread it around.
Yeah, so that's basically the reinsurance. Reinsurance is insurance for insurance companies.
So, talk about the South African situation and how we are trying to be a gateway for reinsurance in Africa. Can we get help from other BRICS nations as well? What are you trying to achieve?
Definitely. That's what we are pushing or focusing on this year as a reinsurance committee. We're saying we're positioning South Africa as a reinsurance gateway into Africa for BRICS. And this is because we've primarily focused on reinsurance from the Western countries, so North America and Europe. And we've seen that doing that, we are limiting ourselves to a small pool of reinsurers versus if you're looking at the whole world. And BRICS nations are a big part of the world economy that can provide additional reinsurance capacity. So the likes of China, India, they have a thriving reinsurance market. And China's economy is very big. And so if we are able to allow countries like that to come help us with our reinsurance, we can build a thriving economy in South Africa and on the African continent.
Yeah, because they have to understand the risks as well. And one of the discussion points was that insurance isn't big on the African continent, besides South Africa and Nigeria making up the largest share. So is it about letting those countries in and understanding what the risks are?
Yeah, so how reinsurers work typically is they help create capacity in the environment they work in. So if a country doesn't have a lot of insurers who can then help to insure the people on the ground, reinsurers can come and help them learn that skill. So the challenge we have here now is our BRICS nations not fully understanding the African continent, and that's why South Africa is well positioned to help bridge that gap.
We're running out of time, so you explained how this is such a crucial economic issue, and let's leave it there. How does it affect investment if a big company wants to come, or if a company like a retailer in South Africa wants to expand?
Yeah, so if you face strikes like what happened in 2021 July, and you don't have enough reinsurance, as a retailer, it's very difficult for you to expand or to even remain in South Africa to continue, selling and creating employment. So reinsurance is very important because what it does is, after those strikes, the retailers were then able to get money to help them start their operations again. So that's crucial, because then reinsurance acts as a protection mechanism. Should something bad happen to you, you can still continue with your business.
And they don't want to come if they're going to be short. And even Sasria has fallen short somewhat.
Yeah, they don't have enough reinsurance capacity. What it means is everyone then doesn't have enough reinsurance capacity if their assets is more than 500 million rands. So the retailers that are creating employment are those companies that need reinsurance beyond 500 million rands. So it's very important that we do have more reinsurance, and BRICS nations can help us with that.
All right, thank you very much. Khodiso Mokonyane, Chair of the BRICS Reinsurance Committee under the BRICS Business Council, and alluding there to the real issue. 500 million rand is the cap in South Africa because companies aren't willing to reinsure the insurers above that, which puts somebody like a retailer, like a ShopRite or a Woolworths or somebody going above that in terms of expanding in real trouble. So can the BRICS nations come in? And this is just the beginning. We'll bring you more from the BRICS Trade Fair, from these discussions held by the BRICS Business Council. They have said that it's very important to get the business people and the players from these different countries in these face-to-face meetings. Back to you.
All right, Francis, most certainly very important discussions being had today as they build up to the start of the summit later on this week on Tuesday. Thank you very much. That's our anchor, Francis Hurd. Let's shift our focus to this story now. Police Minister Bheki Cele has painted yet another grim picture of the state of crime in South Africa. Police have released the 2023-24 first quarter crime statistics covering April to June. But there was some positive feedback, with the murder rate showing a 3.1% decline along with sexual crimes.
Police Minister Bheki Cele emphasized that there was a slight decline in the murder rate. Of those who were murdered, 1,188 were women and children.
3.1% decline in the murder rate is no cause for celebration. 6,228 is not just a number. It is people whose lives were cut short at the hands of other human beings. The 3.1% reduction in the country's murder rate must, however, further bolster all policing interventions that have led to less people being killed in our country.
There's also a decline in sexual crimes.
These include decrease in sexual offences by 1.9%, trio crimes declined by 5.2%, property-related crimes decreased by 4.5%, and contact-related crimes decreased by 1.6%. Further declines have also been noted in rape and sexual assault counts reported to the police in the 3 months of reporting. Both crimes categories recorded 2.8% and 3.8% decrease respectively.
We also had an increase in terms of assault GBH of 1,138. For children, that is both boys and girls, between the ages of 0 and 17 years old, we had 50 more murders, and for attempted murders, we had 47 more murders, and a decrease in terms of assault GBH of 92 counts less for children, that is both boys and girls between the ages of 0 and 17.
The police minister says the slight improvement in some categories is due to more intensive specializing policing coupled with better tracking and tracing of wanted criminals. He says police are also intensifying their fight against illegal miners or zamazamas. The National Police Commissioner says the fight to make South Africa a safer place is still a steep one, especially in the top 3 crime-infested provinces.
Those provinces are not excluded from the implementation of Operation Shamela, and it is yielding results in those provinces and all other provinces nationally. There has been quite a number of significant successes in those provinces. We've seen in Western Cape quite a number of arrests have been made, but across all these provinces we have made quite a number of significant arrests.
As the men and women in blue square off with criminals, this also comes with a hefty price to pay. 31 police officers were killed in the last 3 months on and off duty. Patricia Fasaghi, SABC News in Pretoria.
All right, we're now joined by Jackie Cilliers from the Institute of Security Studies to unpack these figures. Mr. Cilliers, good afternoon and thank you very much for your time. So murders have decreased by 3.1%. The minister says it's no coincidence. He's in fact attributed this decline to greater police visibility and a number of other operations. What are your views on this?
Well, it's probably still too early to really make a pronouncement with regard to a long-term trend. So what we have is a reduction of 3.1% for 3 months. But what we obviously have to look at if that reduction carries on, if there were perhaps seasonal reasons, winter, whatever the case may be, that had an impact on the crime statistics. So it's positive, but it's still early days, and let's hope these positive trends can continue.
All right, fair enough. Then to the relationship between murder and attempted murder. The murders are lower, but we saw that attempted murders have increased.
Yes.
What does this suggest?
Yes. Well, it's probably a statistical anomaly. There are significant problems with police data. We treat police data with a degree of skepticism. It's, of course, the best data we have, but one is not always sure that the trend, particularly over a 3-month period, and the relationships that you're discussing with really can provide a real indicator. South Africa remains hugely violent. We have, as the Minister also said, 68 deaths a day in South Africa, murders in South Africa. This places us in the top 3 or 4 countries globally, countries that are not at war with regard to murders. And this, of course, despite the slight reduction that we've seen for the 3 months, is a huge cause for concern. It requires a whole of government approach, I think, and a whole of society approach to be able to take this down.
You know, I note your concerns around the short period of analysis being the 3 months, but if we must still nevertheless delve into these figures, another category that caught my attention was that of the places of occurrence of some of these crimes, such as assault GBH. The highest number of assaults are actually occurring in residences of perpetrators of victims, not in public spaces. What does this then suggest?
So we have been propagating for many years that there is really a need to focus police attention on where the real challenges are. Something like 50% of all murders occur in, I think it's 170 police precincts. If you focus your attention, your analysis and your efforts at those precincts, it is possible to bring murder, grievous bodily harm and all the associated things down, because crime is a minority business. It is done by groups of criminals who engage in particularly organized crime and other types of crime, but it is focused. And what we should be doing is really putting lots of attention on the analysis of the statistics and then the focusing of our police efforts in those precincts where we really have a problem. And they are not across South Africa. Our crime, as you indicated, is very much focused in specific areas, both in metros as well as in particular provinces, and that's where policing really have to place their focus.
But more importantly, we are victims of those around us, even with the sexual assault.
Yes.
So what can police do there? Because one would say this perhaps leads credence to the statement that the war against crime is not exclusively the responsibility of police, but ours as community members as well.
Yes, no, that's very important. And the police will not solve crime in South Africa until such time as we build a culture of accountability and we fix the entire policing, the entire criminal justice system. You know, only 15% of murder cases in South Africa are resolved. 15%. In other words, 85% of murders, you can get away with it. That is not a deterrent. That is not a way to deal with murder, which is the most prominent and pronounced statistic that we often use with one another. So there are huge management, organizational challenges within the police. What we see is real efforts by the Minister and the National Police Commissioner on visible policing, but what is actually probably much more necessary is behind the scenes fixing of the management and the funding of detectives, shifting away from the funding of VIP protection and looking at violence prevention. And that's what you're referring to, because violence prevention is not something that the police really can do. It is a responsibility of local communities, of local governments, of business, of all of us. We need to build a safer society, and that takes this culture of accountability and of trust between ordinary South Africans and the police, and that the police needs to re-earn, because trust in the police has gone down significantly.
I'm glad that you mentioned that, because ever so often when we cover a number of these police imbeciles, what you hear from community members is the lack of trust in the police officials. When they go to the police station, they accuse them of all sorts of things, be it accepting bribes, sometimes even assisting some of the perpetrators in their communities. So what can be done there to just restore the trust?
So surveys that the Human Sciences Research Council have done indicate exactly what you are saying. Trust has gone down year by year. And that is going to require first a demonstration of accountability and leadership by government from cabinet level across the criminal justice system and by police. You know, what we have seen, particularly with the current minister, who is very active and very energetic, but he rushes around and deals with crisis prevention the whole time. And it's less now a problem than previously, but infringes on the responsibilities of the National Police Commissioner. Our policing challenges are largely management and back to basic issues. They are not, it's not rocket science, but the management of forensics, of firearms control, and so on and so forth, it's been chaotic for decades. And not decades, crime trends started increasing from 2010, 2011. Since then, the situation has particularly gotten bad. But it's really, in a sense, fixing the management behind the police. A very top-heavy, very centralized system of policing. We have one of the largest police agencies in the world, and we should be pushing our management of policing and those type of systems down to provinces and metros where the crime actually occurs.
You touch on a very important aspect of firearms control. This is one that they seem to struggle with, or seemed to struggle with for the longest time, because we've always reported as well on the number of firearms that have been confiscated by police that find themselves in the hands of criminals yet again. Something which has even led to community members saying, why should we surrender our firearms? Because it seems you've got here criminals who arm themselves and will be having no firearms to protect ourselves.
Yeah, the majority of firearms that are used in South Africa for crime come from the police. There was this well-known case of a colonel who was arrested and prosecuted because he was selling arms to criminals, particularly in the Western Cape, then to the taxi industry in KwaZulu-Natal. So it's fixing those kind of things. Like the firearms registry. And that is something that, in my view, you should just source out to the private sector, that and the forensics lab, because the police can't deal with it. So there are ways to fix these things, and fixing that, forensics, firearms, will have a huge knock-on effect in crime and detection of crime in South Africa.
Mr. Cilliers, thank you very much for your time this afternoon. That's Jackie Cilliers. He's from the Institute of Security Studies. More news on the other side of this break. Do stay with us. Welcome back. Thank you very much for staying with us. Now, thousands of people descended on Marikana on Wednesday to commemorate the 11th anniversary of the brutal killing of mine workers back in 2012. Now, 34 miners were gunned down by police after a 6-month-long strike demanding higher wages. The Association of Mine Workers and Construction Union erected a stage at the Kopi where the tragedy occurred, now announcing that for the first time they had invited the CEO of the Sibanye-Stillwater to attend the commemoration. Sibanye-Stillwater brought the operations from Lonmin after the massacre. To tell us now how the families of those who died are dealing with what's been slammed as the slow pace of justice is Nomzamo Zondo. She's the Executive Director at Socio-Economic Rights Institute of South Africa. Nomzamo, good afternoon, and thank you very much for your time. Perhaps for context, just take us through the journey that you have walked with some of the family members of the victims and those who were hurt.
Good afternoon, Fundo. Thank you so much. Look, so SERI has been representing the families since 2012. During that journey, some of our clients didn't just lose immediately post the massacre, didn't just lose the deceased miners, but some of them lost mothers, they lost fathers. And in the last 11 years, we have had young people die from suicide, that includes the child of Semichukanisi, who was one of the mine workers killed by the police on the 13th of August. It includes a daughter of Mrs. Bambele, who also committed suicide after she had been looking after her siblings in the Eastern Cape as her mother came to work in Marikana at Lonmin Nausman. And in that time, I think the family's concern has been the fact that they really felt as if there is no appreciation of the hurt and the trauma that has been brought by the massacre on them. The families fought to participate in the Commission of Inquiry. Many would remember that on the very first day, on the opening of the Commission of Inquiry, Advocate Ntsebeza SC called out their names and pointed out to the commission, but that the commission was starting without the families of the deceased being in the room. The very same families had to fight to get the report released to them and litigated together with the surviving miners in 2015, so the report be released to them, which it was eventually released in June 2015. After the report, they instituted a civil claim against the Minister of Police. The claim was brought by 320 individuals coming from 36 families, and that claim asked for an apology. It asked for different heads of damages. The first one, of course, just the obvious one, being the loss of their breadwinner and the loss of the support that they would have received from the miners if they'd not been killed. But they also asked that the trauma that they've been forced to go through be compensated. They asked to say, in so far as some of them need to go to doctors to heal, that must be financed by the state. They asked for money for their pain and suffering. They asked for money for the fact that they've had to grieve when that shouldn't have been in the cards. They also asked for the state to compensate them for the fact that they've lost partners, lovers, friends, for the widows from their husbands, that their children lost the support of a father.
Now, Nomzamo, we heard from the Solicitor General, or at least he felt it important this time around to perhaps bring the citizens of the country up to speed around compensation, stating that around 300 million had been paid, and went on to even make a statement around the need to guard against the politicization of this compensation conversation. What do you make of just that statement alone, that perhaps it needs to be brought to an end now, insofar as compensation is concerned?
So I feel like it would be brought to an end if they actually compensated. Right. It's beautiful because in his statement, he broke down how much money has been paid to whom. And he explains that Seri, which represents 36 families, received 71 million in 2018. That 71 million was the financial loss that the families suffered through the death of their breadwinners. And that was only for 34 of the 36 families that we represent. It cannot end until the state has compensated for the hurt, for the trauma, and for the removal of these deceased miners from the lives of our clients. And so if he wants it to end, then the state must compensate the families for that trauma, for that pain, and for the loss that they are suffering, not having a father to negotiate their lobola, not having a father to see them graduate from university, in not having a father welcome them from their first day of school, from not having their father see them off as they start preschool for the first time. That is what needs to be compensated. I understand the Solicitor General spoke about how long is a piece of string. A piece of string, in this case, if he's talking about the civil damages claim that is being brought by the family, is as long as the state takes the consequences of their actions. The state is not here just because they are the state and they are government. They are here because their employees, who some of were even based from the Eastern Cape, based from Gauteng, came and shot 37 miners. That's why the state is here. The state is not being invited here willy-nilly. The state is here because after their employees shot and killed, in fact murdered our our clients' family members. Our clients' families have had to face consequences, and those consequences cannot just be borne by the families. They must be borne by the state, which started this thing.
So you're saying it must go beyond the patrimonial damages here, that when you guys speak of constitutional damages, you're speaking about what is more than just what they would have earned at the time had they remained alive.
You understand it so beautifully, Mfundo. Our clients had fathers, they had brothers, they had sons. And those people were not just simply people who went down a mine shaft and dug up platinum for lawmen. And if the state does not understand that, then we are quite confident as the attorneys for the families that we can make a court understand it and a court conclude that those damages must be paid out. And of course, it is heartbreaking to have to explain that to the state, to have to explain it to the lead attorney of the state, that the Constitution governs all of us. If he doesn't understand that, as the Solicitor General, of course it makes sense that the Minister of Police won't understand it. It makes sense that the SABC as an institution won't understand it, because he is the person who went to law school and is meant to understand that the Constitution is the supreme law of this country. It governs the actions of government. It even goes so far as to even govern the actions of individuals. And here we are talking about the actions of government, which must promote, fulfill, and protect the rights in the Bill of Rights. And in this case, they didn't do that. It was in the actions of the state that our clients' loved ones lost their right to life. It was in the actions of the state that our clients lost their right to family life, a right that they were entitled to today walk hand in hand across Marikana with their loved ones on payday. On the day that one of them has lost a parent, be able to say, at least my husband will be there to support my brothers, my husband will be there to support me because my mother is now late. And those things were taken away from our clients by the state. And of course, the state cannot, if they would be able to bring them back, the families would prefer that. The families would prefer that the 36 men that were taken away on the 13th and the 16th of August were alive. And since the state cannot do that, it must then bring them back through financial compensation, and that's what we are asking for.
And we all do know that losing a loved one is the single most traumatic event in one's life that they relive at every great occasion of their life, be it their graduation, like you say, lobola, and all sorts. Good luck with this particular litigation. Nomzamo, thank you very much for your time. That's Nomzamo Zondo. She's the Executive Director at Socioeconomic Rights Institute of South Africa. To this story now, talks of who will lead the multi-party charter for South Africa coalition as president will only be discussed post-elections should the ANC dip below 50% at the polls. This was one of the outcomes of the two-day convention where political parties like the Democratic Alliance, IFP, FF+, Action SA, UIM, Isanko and SNP adopted a pre-election coalition pact. Among the declaration of the charter is that parties from this bloc will not work with the ANC as well as the EFF.
The question that lingers on the minds of South Africans is who amongst the coalition partners would be president. That question will only be answered after the 2024 polls, which are likely to be 8 months away, and that's if the governing party fails to reach the 50% threshold.
We made a conscious decision not to enter in as to who will be the president. For one, amongst other reasons, whoever could be identified now will give advantage to his or her political party at the expense of others. So now we felt let us give a fair platform to all political parties, and that question will be entered to immediately once the results are out.
However, the group has decided that the largest party in the bloc will become the leader of government business. Ordinarily, in this current system, the leader of government business is the deputy president.
There's a party with that get the most votes will automatically take charge of their position. I mean, at the moment, for example, it's a national level. The arrangement is that it will be the deputy president, so that's the arrangement currently now. So that will change within a coalition government. It would then change, really be a big change in the way governance operates at that level.
The declaration further states that the ANC and EFF are not an option.
The issue of EFF, ANC working together, concern, why should it be a concern? If they want to work together, let it be. That's not really our decision. The reason why we are here together as political parties is to say we can't have an ANC government here after 29 years of destruction of our country. And why, obviously, would not really work with EFF as a Section SA, and I think all other parties agree. We agreed on a free market economy.
Should they manage to unseat the ANC government, the party says it will allocate positions in Parliament based on merit. Natasha Piri, SABC News, Johannesburg.
All right, now still on matters of the general elections, the ANC Secretary-General Fikile Mbalula says the ANC is going to work hard to ensure that the party gets an outright majority during the 2024 national elections. He was speaking to the SABC's international news editor, Sophie Mkwena, after an event at the Chinese embassy in Pretoria ahead of the BRICS summit. Mbalula says the party is not having secret coalition deals with any political party as the aim is to win elections.
Well, we remain focused in terms of our work as the ANC to work for an outright majority win. We know that that outright majority win is not a given. We need to work for it. We need to win the confidence of the people. There are many challenges that our country is facing, but we know that we have made some strides as the ANC, and we remain focused.
All right, for more on this story, let's bring in political analyst Professor Ntsikelelo Breakfast. Professor, good afternoon, and thank you very much for your time. So most of us have had an opportunity to go through the agreement between the two parties, rather all parties, 7, apologies there. But before we get into the various points of that agreement, what are your views on just the fact that there was an agreement to sign after 2 days? Because some were under the impression that this was the start of a conversation around forming an alternative to the ANC, which would possibly be taken back to their constituencies.
Fundo, thank you very much for having me. I think one-party dominance is a thing of the past, and the ANC has been dealt with a blow covering the period of 2016 until to date, and that has created a scope for coalition formations to rise to a prominence. No wonder the opposition parties have met and mapped out a way forward in terms of how they can join forces, because we've seen coalition formations falling apart because the political elite have a tendency to rush into joining forces without developing a conflict management mechanism to deal with these contradictions that they have. Now, my view is that negotiations form part of conflict management, and that lies at the heart of coalition arrangements. But in terms of international best practices, normally negotiations, they happen after the democratic outcomes, not before. So it was a surprise to see leaders of opposition parties coming together, crafting a plan on how they are going to work side by side. But of course, one can argue and say there's a first time for everything. Mm-hmm. But I think maybe we should applaud them for having a plan on how they can improve the way things are, because the way things are is not the way things should be, in the sense that normally when there are disagreements, you see coalition formations falling apart. Maybe they want to prevent those things, because when you have coalition formations falling apart, it means that will impact on service
most certainly. But you're not alone in just that view that perhaps it's premature. We heard the ACDP, Reverend Misho, actually speaking to my colleague Bongiwe earlier this week, stating that for him, he feels it is premature. You need to go to the polls, test your electoral might, and then come after the fact, because he's even of the view that of those political parties, some of them might cease to exist. They might not come back and be voted for.
Precisely. I think maybe the challenge that we have is that South Africa doesn't have a long-standing history of coalition formations. They only rose to prominence of late. I think they rose to prominence in the early 2000s, because during apartheid, I mean, we only saw two coalition formations in the early 1900s. I think in 1924 during the Pact government, and also in 1934. After that, the National Party was hegemonic. And then the ANC rose to power. So we are still on a learning curve in terms of drawing from international best practices. No wonder we still have some gaps that we need to bridge.
Then to some of the elements of that agreement. It was agreed that a president would not necessarily come from the largest party within the coalition, but that the leader of government business would. What did you make of that?
Yeah, I think the plan is good, but of course there are still some gaps. For instance, under which policies are they going to campaign in the build-up to elections? Because these political parties, they have their own specific policies. Are they going to do away with political identity and then contest under one name? Or are they going to
No, but Peter Groenewald addressed that. I'm sure you also remember, apologies for interjecting. Peter Groenewald of FF Plus was one person who was adamant that he must insert this at the beginning of his address, and at the end, he spoke about the need to preserve the political identities of these political parties. So one would say, it's not a question here. They will be having their individual manifestos, and I believe perhaps for FF Plus, it's quite important that they be distinguishable from the Democratic Alliance, because he kept on belaboring that point every time he had the mic.
No, of course. But my view is that it will be prudent for them to contest under one umbrella, to do away with the power dynamics. I mean, I'm thinking of other successful coalition formations, like, for instance, in Zambia, how Chiluba rose to power by dislodging the political party of Kenneth Kaunda, and how also Hugo Chavez in Venezuela came into power. So those are international best practices that can be employed to avoid some of the internal contradictions, because I think when elections are done and dusted, people might fight over a position. So I think maybe they need to be circumspect in terms of addressing those issues.
Speaking of fighting over positions, if we look at the Democratic Alliance, I noted Professor Gomede in his closing remarks, when thanking all of the leaders, he singled out John Steenhuisen, saying that as the largest party, there was a degree of humility or compromise on their part. And honestly, looking at the agreement, it does suggest there would have been a number of concessions on the part of the DA, because the tone we saw entering into that particular convention was completely different to days building up.
No, of course, my reading of the situation is that the forum or the dialogue is a brainchild of the DA in the form of a Moonshot Pact, but now they've opted for another concept, which is a multi-party charter, whatever you call it. So there have been some compromises. I think if you employ the latter, not the former, then you are doing away with the idea that it's the DA that is trying to be dominant. But I'm sure, those issues of which political party is dominant might arise in future.
Then another agreement was that of extending invitation to other like-minded political parties if they are to successfully topple the ANC. Do you see more parties joining the pact, particularly with the understanding that the EFF, which is also an opposition party like all of them, must be excluded?
I think what brings them together in the main is to prevent the ANC and the EFF joining forces, because that will give the ANC a room to come to power. So that was the rationale behind the political initiative in the form of a Moonshot Pact. But other political parties have been very much discontent in terms of the posture of the DA. They see it as a bully. And also what has compounded the situation is the proposal of a threshold. So what I'm saying is that some political parties might stay away from this because they think that they might not have a significant role, or they might lose seats if this threshold is being proposed.
Now, I noted another interesting fact here, that if we look at the pact itself, the sole idea is to remove the ANC and keep the EFF out of government. Would this pact in itself not inadvertently do the opposite? That you are in essence forcing the ANC and EFF to work together by excluding both. Would it have not been beneficial for this multi-party structure to pick one battle at a time? That if it is to topple the ANC, so be it, allow the EFF into the fold. If it is to keep the EFF out of government, then you choose that. Would it not have been beneficial to choose one battle at a time, seeing that we know so often that even with the ANC, they went into an alliance with the SACP, whose ultimate goal is to realize socialism. But they knew as a nationalist movement that that is not their ultimate goal, but they could join forces even with a labor movement here, which is essentially always fighting with a government. Do you not think they could have been more effective if perhaps they chose one battle at a time?
Fundo, my view is that the ideological proximity of the EFF and the ANC, they are closer to each other. As opposed to the DA and the ANC, or as opposed to the DA and the EFF. So that creates a scope for the EFF and the ANC to work together. But some people have been unhappy about the behavior of the president of the EFF, that sometimes he tends to take a swipe at leaders of the ANC and that he doesn't show a respect. That is a view that is held by other people in some quarters. The second point is that the idea that anything but the ANC is problematic. Yes, it's an open secret that there is a slow pace of service delivery. The ANC has not done the way it should have. But at the same time, removing the ANC doesn't mean that there will be a change for the better. You can remove the ANC and have a change for the worse. So I'm just concerned that we have not heard about a plan. For instance, what is the model of development that they are proposing for the country? Yes, I heard someone speaking about a free market system, but that is not a comprehensive.
But one would say perhaps that is possibly what they fundamentally would differ with the EFF on, just economic policy, because of how starkly different they are.
No, for sure. But then again, the question that begs is, what about racially inspired policies which form part of transformation? Because the DA says it is colorblind. It subscribes to a philosophical outlook of
non-racialism.
Yes, and therefore it transcends beyond racial classification, meaning that they don't believe in Employment Equity Act, BBBE. Now, to solicit votes, you are going to have a problem then, because that is an antithesis of a transformation.
So where does it place the IFP then? Because here they've entered into this agreement. Velenkosini Hlabisa felt it was a fair agreement to enter into. What would it mean for them now going down to the ground and campaigning?
Well, if everything goes according to plan, I won't be surprised if the leader of the IFP is deployed as the president or as the leader of this coalition arrangement. That was a proposal from a Freedom Front. But what brings together in the main the IFP and the DA is this notion of a free market system. They believe in the free market system. I'm not sure about other policies, but I've not heard, a stronger articulation of the IFP surrounding a transformation with regard to the structure of the economy in terms of the role of black people and also in the workplace.
It will most certainly be an interesting time ahead of those elections come 2024. Mr. Breakfast, thank you very much for your time this afternoon. That was political analyst Professor Ntsikelelo Breakfast. More news on the other side. Stay with us.
The department also accuses the EFF of wanting to be joined as an applicant on the matter to gain political clout.
This court is not a playground for seeking political mileage.
The EFF, however, dismissed the accusation. The party told court that the department did not do enough to ensure that the act was accessible after it had garnered no comments.
A decent enough effort at the very least was made in respect of the Doctors for Life and what the test is. Of course, we can't prescribe to the MEC what specific steps to do. All we can offer the minister are the general principles of what he ought to do.
Judgment is expected to be delivered next week. Beman Baloi, SABC News, Polokwane.
And that's where we leave it for today. We're back tomorrow. Enjoy your afternoon further.